breaking bread. We breaking bread. We breaking bread. One conversation at a time. We breaking bread. We breaking bread. We breaking bread. One conversation at a time.
The Breaking Bread Village.
One conversation at a time.
The Breaking Bread Village.
One conversation at a time.
Hey everybody, I decided to play our intro from the beginning. I always like that, and I appreciate young brother that supplied that to us. So we started a little bit early today, and I'm really excited about this conversation. I am going to go ahead and bring on our guest for today, so we can go ahead and introduce himself. So let me bring him on. Hello, greetings.
Greetings. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and, just a brief description, then we'll get into a little bit more about you.
All right. Well, I hear a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure if we're set up there, but
okay.
I know there's like an echo cancellation option on there.
Yes, let me see. Let me mute myself. Sometimes when the person mutes for some reason, that helps, but I'm going to look at that while you introduce yourself, okay?
Okay. All right. So I am Professor Spira. I practice something called the mucusless diet healing system by Professor Arnold Ehret, and have done so for over 20 years and have helped a lot of people overcome numerous different ailments and things on this particular path. And I was suffering from a lot of different ailments and illnesses before I started practicing the mucusless diet healing system. Including like my chronic migraine headaches almost every day. I would go to school with boxes of tissues, blow my nose all day, have really bad ear infections constantly, chronic bronchitis year after year. I would have bronchitis almost every year. And there was really no remedy in sight. I never had really heard about any serious natural health approaches that would help me overcome these issues. And I had an open mind. I knew that something was wrong with this reality that I'm a part of, but I didn't have the answers. And so once I learned about the mucusless diet healing system, I was a freshman in college, or about to be a sophomore in college, and read the book, started practicing, and the rest is history. I lost 100 pounds in 6 months and overcame all these different ailments, overcame the sleep apnea, and just got off the sleep app unit, allergy medication, all that stuff. And and then just felt 100 times better. In fact, I got my before and after here.
I was going to ask you if you had a picture. Okay, because I was trying to find it. Okay, cool. Wow. So thank you for sharing that. First of all, again, I appreciate you for being here today and having this conversation, because I think it's so important. Is that better? Is the feedback better?
I am still hearing it.
I'm sorry.
I have the echo cancellation is active on mine.
And see, it's off on mine. Let me see. No, I mean, it's active on mine, I should say. So I don't know why it's still doing that.
And I'm not sure if the audience is hearing that or not.
Let me see. I can ask. If someone is watching, are you hearing the echo as well? Because I want to be able for people to really hear everything that we're saying. And I know the only way sometimes to correct that is to
kind of leave and come back in.
Well, leave and come back in, or mute while the other person is talking. Unfortunately,
for somehow that wasn't even working on mine, because I was echoing to myself even when you were muted.
Oh, really? See, and I don't hear an echo. So let me see.
Okay.
Trying to see if someone is. Can you still hear it?
Check 1 2.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you?
Okay. it's really delayed, but it's a weird echo because it's so far delayed.
And you're a music person too, so you pick up on sounds a little bit
Right.
more sensitive to sounds. Because I don't hear it on my end. I don't hear an
Okay.
echo, and I'm trying to see if someone hears it on their end.
Well,
And no one,
maybe should I try leaving and come back
yeah,
in
try
and see
that.
if that
Yeah, try to see if
resets it?
that'll.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay.
We are just going to pause for a moment. He heard a little bit of feedback on his end, even within his own hearing device. So we're going to try to get him back in and see if maybe that resets it. So just bear with us. Technology, I tell you. So if you're out there listening, if you hear an echo, please comment and let me know so I can see if it's on my end. All right, let's see if that worked.
All right. Check 1 2. All right, we're good.
Okay.
Reset it.
It's good on my end too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's all right, let's get into this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because again, like I said, I appreciate you for being here and sharing this because I think sometimes we're afraid to talk about this. So first, I want to just really just dive right into what brought you to this point because oftentimes in our lives, the things that kind of are life altering are what kind of propel us into changes, right? And making different, very like conscious choices to change. So do you mind sharing that story of what happened and got you into this journey or onto this journey?
Yeah, so growing up, I talked about that I was sick a lot as a young person, but my mother was also very sick, and she was in and out of the hospital my entire life, as long as I can remember. With the ambulance was called sometimes once a week or a couple times a week. It was constantly going to the emergency room and then stay in the hospital for a couple days, come back to home to an apartment, then go back to the hospital. And that happened constantly. And that was just a part of my life. And so when she was stuck in the hospital, I would stay with my aunt and my grandma, and who essentially raised me when I wasn't with my mom. And even when I was with my mom, she in the condition she was in, she wasn't able to really do a lot with me as a young person. So when I was with her, I was kind of raising myself. Then when I was with my grandma and my aunt, I was like, got all, all the attention in the world. But when I was 10 years old, my grandma passed away. And that was the most devastating because I had that mother-son kind of bond with my grandma. Sure. I didn't know that she was sick, and just I didn't have any concept or understanding of death or that something was going to be an issue. And so when she passed, that just caught me off guard, and it was just really devastating. A week after she passed away, my mother got congestive heart failure and went into the hospital, got a double bypass surgery, and then she never came back home again. She was in a nursing home for the next 2 years. She had both her legs amputated because her foot started to turn gangrenous, that black, that awful look. And so she had both her legs amputated, and it got to the point where her kidneys started to fail, and she just was like, I don't want to, I'm done. She didn't want to go and do any of the therapies and that kind of stuff. And so, so she passed away. I was 12 years old at that point. And so I was under this impression and kind of thinking in my head, this false belief that I would go down that path, that the sicknesses that I had were genetic. There was nothing I could do about it. No one was, you would hear people say, oh, well, eat a little better, or you want to eat healthy. But that usually revolved around losing weight or some kind of vanity thing. It wasn't based on real health.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of just moved forward in life. And I became one of those kids that was like an overachiever. Sometimes they say there's two types of kids. One type where that goes through that kind of thing when they're young. One type that just is like becomes this bad kid, and they miss school and they go tell off
Because of the
teachers,
trauma, right?
that kind of thing. And then the other one is the one that just is like an overachiever and just tries to do everything perfect and straight A's. And I was involved in all kinds of organizations. I became an Eagle Scout and then Order of the Arrow Vigil Honor member and all these different accolades that I had at the time. But I was trying to run away from, emotionally kind of run away from, and really not deal with what I had been through at that young age. And then and all along the way, I just kind of thought to myself, like, there's got to be an answer to what's going on here, that this is not normal. I would go and I would spend so much time in nursing homes and hospitals, and I would just look around and just like, this isn't right. Something's wrong with this. Or everybody's acting like that this is kind of normal. Most people don't even, especially my age at that time, don't know that this kind of environments exist. They don't, none of my friends knew anything about going to hospitals or hanging out in nursing homes. It's like, if they visited, maybe once, if a family member had an accident and they were in the hospital for a few days, but not
long time,
year after year. Just to really get a chance to be immersed into that environment and just to see, like, is this the best that we can do as a supposedly conscious species?
Yeah.
And an elevated species, because some of these the care in some of these nursing homes and just that entire system is so predatory, but there's no one to speak truth to power on it or create a revolution around it, because everybody wants to ignore that.
Because it's easier, right? Sometimes it's easier. And then too, I just want to just interject real quick, because when you talked about how you thought that this was just your destiny, it's because that's what we're taught, right? I mean, I've heard my whole life that, this person, that's just their genetics. That's just, what they're passing down from someone else, and it's just in their blood, right? It's just, part of their DNA. And so we've been taught that endlessly, right? So I could understand how you would think that would be your fate based on what we're taught. So go ahead.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly it. Everybody is like, oh, you're just big boned, and the heart disease runs in the family, and this and that, and just all this kind of stuff. And in the meantime, I'm thinking that hemorrhoids are normal, or I'm going through the outbreak. I'm 17 years old, going through hemorrhoid outbreaks all the time, and sick constantly, is blowing my nose all the time, and real bad constipation, and taking Pepto-Bismol almost every day for just really bad heartburn, or what they call it, heartburn. That's a weird name. Indigestion. And I was real lactose intolerant, but they got a pill for that, and so I was taking the Lactaid. That got popular at the time, so you can still eat dairy, and so it was just a mess. And there's not a lot of voices out there, especially at that time, that would say, look, that's not normal. Like, this entire system of eating and the way that it's set up, and you go into a school and you see some famous athlete trying to sell you milk with the fake milk mustache and this whole get your protein. Like, this is bizarro world. This is not normal. And so it took, when I found out about the mucus diet, and then went through a real significant reprogramming, kind of to unlearn and relearn just everything about just reality and humanity. And
so around what age were you when you decided to take your life back into your own hands? Like, what I mean, I know, of course, what happened with your grandmother, your mother, like, kind of helped push you into that. But at what point did you say, enough is enough?
So I was 18. I was 18 years old, going on 19, when I started making certain kinds of things. I mean, even as early as 17, I kind of was living a double life. So it's at school, I would be portrayed myself as the varsity football player, and then I was one of the best musicians in the school. So I kind of sculpted this kind of image is which is what I thought everybody was doing. Like, I actually thought everybody at school, like, we were all in on this game that we could construct our personas, and like we're actors or something. Like, I kind of, because that's how I thought about, because I didn't really relate to the way that everybody was kind of socialized and that kind of thing, just because of the way I came up. So it's kind of as a only child, in terms of I wasn't around other kids a lot and stuff. And so I almost had to study like real basic things that most people would just do for granted. I kind of studied that, like, okay, so, and but that created this analysis that I've had since I was really young, of analyzing social dynamics and cultural dynamics and value systems and things. And it's like, and I still do it to this day. It's the same stuff I did when I was young. I have prettier language to use to describe what I'm looking at. But I was doing that kind of stuff. And so when I was 17 and 18, I started really studying. So I was, and I had it was somebody that, called the, for lack of a better term, that was my introduction to the Black consciousness community, and just that getting into, Stolen Legacy and autobiography of Malcolm X and Diop, and just that whole legacy of stuff, it's kind of the rites of passage for a lot of folks. So I was getting into that, but I was also reading, that same mentor was also telling me, like, hey, you go read Plato's Republic, go read Aristotle, look at what Western society is built upon, understanding where they got it from, understanding where Pythagoras, where he went when he did his 40-day fast to try to get into the Egyptian mystery schools. But so understand that missing history, but you also want to study where they're coming from.
Oh yeah.
And so, so it was like, I kind of got that entire education, and I was just sort of doing that, not around friends or wasn't talking about it. I was just was really into studying. And then at one point I read a book called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and he champions Kriya Yoga, and I wanted to enroll in that. So I enrolled in the program. I started getting not emails. This was before email. I started getting the mailings, and they would describe how to do the different breath work. And as I would try to do the breath work, my nose would be so stopped up. I was unable to breathe in through my nose at all, because it was way too inflamed, way too much mucus in my head in general. And so I kind of had this realization, like, you know what, I got to do something about this, because I'll never be able to do this kind of breath work if I don't deal with this issue up in my head. And that was really the first time also when I was trying to get off of eating dead animal flesh, because they recommend basically a vegetarian would be considered like a vegetarian diet, but they don't give any instructions on how to do it. They just say, don't eat a couple foods and that's it.
Right.
And so it was around this time that I met Brother Air, aka Willie Smart, who introduced me to the Mucusless Diet Healing System. And I knew him for about a year before he had told me about it. And then we were, as the story goes, I was at a jam session at Shea Nora with my friend Ryan, who's a saxophone player, and it was in between sets, and they had this buffet of all this food over it, like free food for the musicians. And so I got a plate, and I had all these chicken wings and and macaroni and cheese and all this mess on the plate. And so I'm sitting there eating, and Willie's is across from us, just kind of looking, and his face is starting to just kind of like
frown up.
Yeah, like he can't hold it in any longer. And so he starts talking about diet and leading into the mucusless diet in his little artful way that he does. And before I knew it, I was just kind of looking down at the plate, and it was getting slower and slower. And then I just stopped. I was like, just looking at it like, stopped. I just stopped eating. And I'm just like, wow. he just
I want to
laid
talk
some
about
info
that.
on me.
Let me put this up real quick. So I call the mucus.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because I
Uh-huh.
don't think that people really talk about it as much. I mean, because I've dealt with allergies, I've dealt with you know how every winter people say, oh, this is just, you know, arthritis or you know, different thing, bursitis and all this stuff and coming every winter. But that's inflammation, right? So talk a
Right.
little bit more about the mucus pandemic and how what he shared with you in regards to that book, how that enlightened you to see the different stuff that was happening within your body and other people's.
Yeah, it was a true revelation because I'd never thought about the body like that. I'd never thought about that we were capable of not eating certain things that turns out are the foods that cause inflammation in the body, that caused all this waste to collect. And so he just kind of laid it on us like, look, anything that you eat that's not a fruit or a green leafy vegetable is slime producing, is mucus forming,
Wow.
and leaves behind waste in the body. This waste, the longer it sits and it gets stagnant, it gets acidic, that's when you start to damage cells in the lining of your colon, or you start to get inflammation in different organs, and different glands start to not perform and function properly, and you get all, you know, your levels. People are so concerned about their levels but they're not concerned about their colons and what's inside.
Yeah.
You know, you got to flush that out, and then you can deal with the rest. But it's the real, you know, we're trying to deal with this, we call it the slave diet, where soul food killed more black folks than the Ku Klux Klan, and it's an
we
old
don't want to
throwback.
talk about that. We don't want to
Right.
talk about that. And so that's why I'm just so appreciative of this conversation, because it is real. And I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm gonna kind of put this up too, because this is a real thing, food dependency, right? I mean, it is something that's kind of been ingrained in us and taught. I mean, we use it to celebrate. We use it to come together. It's always a festive time. And then everybody afterwards, what they call it, the itis, where when you get done, you're tired, you can't move, you're achy, your stomach hurts and blah, blah, blah. And so all these things happen. But then even for myself, as I went on and am on a journey of, self-realization and just health, you realize that you are food dependent, right? We do. And of course, we all need nutrients and things to live. But when I say dependency, I mean, emotionally, all these different things that, our brain triggers us and says, oh, you need to get a piece of cake. You need something sweet or something, savory, they call it, and so we do become so dependent on that for just a lot of different variables in our life. So getting off of that, really, I mean, addiction, right? Because it is an addiction. We're so food dependent that we have to have this, that, or the other. Talk to us about making that switch, and coming out of that, because when you do start to eat better, you feel better. But it's still, we're so dependent. So go ahead. I don't want to ramble.
So I like to try to, especially when talking to brothers and sisters in the community, I like to try to get us to look back at the history and the ancestors, and even the younger ancestors, the Malcolm X's and the Huey P. Newtons, and that legacy, Kwame Ture, that energy. Take that energy, that determination, that focus, and now you put that on controlling what you put into your body. Now we're getting somewhere. So it's serious work. This is serious revolutionary work. There's nothing more important in your health, and there's nothing more revolutionary than learning to control what you put into your body. And so we have to grow up, and it's like a real adulthood. So we have to kind of get out of that. It's like, yeah, we've been drugged to the point where we just food is just like a party favor. And we just, we're putting, defiling our body because we think it's fun, but it's an addiction. As you're saying, the dependency, there's an addiction that comes along with the social addiction. And so that was one thing for me that I had to be really hardcore about. and where that helped me excel and be successful was I wasn't going to let social dynamics be the thing that held me back from practicing this lifestyle at the highest level that I could. So I didn't have a problem somebody calling me up like, hey, we about to go out to the club, like we going to this restaurant, come on. And I'm like, hey, I can't go today. I'm probably not going to go for a lot of days. It's like I just got real hardcore about that social part because I was seeing that be the thing that was really making people fall flat on their face, because they would do really well for a while, then all of a sudden they would get the call to go to the club, to go to the restaurant, and they thought that they could have control. They're like, well, I can go, I'll order something good, I'll get some vegetables. And you look at the menu and you realize like, oh man, there really isn't anything on here. Then now you're trying to, if you could try to have them make something up, you'd be like, hey, can I just get some Steve vegetables and a salad? And then what comes out is a waste of money and time, because it's a pathetic looking little salad that comes out. Then you don't know 100% that those vegetables haven't been basted in butter. And because half the time you'd be like, look, I don't want no butter, no seasoning, just get, and it comes out and you look at it, you're like, man, this looks and smells like it's butters on it, and so it's just a hassle. And so I went like about 13 years where I didn't eat in any restaurants.
Wow.
And,
okay. Wow.
And Brother Air's been 40 years and he never went back. The only thing that brought me back was there was a vegan restaurant that actually had food that I could eat. And so I checked it out. I'm like, okay, this is cool. But yeah, because it would be like somebody that was that's an alcoholic. There's a period of time where they're like, don't go to any bars, until you get over that hump.
That's
and
true.
You don't go, don't put yourself in that environment. You got to change your environment. And so that was something that I noticed as I changed my diet, my value system changed, what I thought was fun changed. Because when I was, I started this when I was young, I was 19. So I was at that age of where it was fun to me to go to a club and me and the boys would, pick a fight with people or whatever, like that was exciting. That was fun. But once I started removing we call it the pus and mucus forming foods, that stimulation, the kind of behavior that creates, I didn't enjoy that anymore. I didn't find myself in those environments. There was no more group fights to get into because I just wasn't in that I just wasn't in that environment.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I wanted to ask you about the spiritual part of it, right? Because we're talking about physical part, which is of course awesome, but I also want to talk about the spiritual part, because that's what you're kind of touching on now, and how you changed even your values and the people around you. It sounds like, because it is the same thing. If everybody around you is doing drugs and you're an addict, you're not you don't need to stay around those people. So tell me about that spiritual change and just kind of what happened, epiphanies that you had during that time of transformation.
Yeah, it was because I had that attitude, and I was at the time, like I was really studying, like the guys I was looking up to, Malcolm X, and who said he ate like once a day and had, for the information he had at his time, he was eating fairly well. But just that there's a lot of those guys in that era, I was just really inspired by that energy, that revolutionary energy. And I made the connection with seeing like this was the missing link in the movements in the 60s and the 70s, was the dietary part. Because when you look, and I've watched a lot of those old documentaries, and you will see there's a big difference when they interview them when they're younger, and then if they do the retrospective, it's like you can tell like, oh wow, they let it go, and they got and because a lot of times that revolutionary kind of energy is gone. They've kind of assimilated to whatever the thing was, and so they can talk about what they did when they were young, but it's like they've fallen for the trappings of the Cosby era. It was like that kind of thing. And so I looked at that and said, well, what if that didn't happen? Like, what if you maintain that fervor and that kind of revolutionary attitude? What could you do to do that? And that's where I saw with practicing the mucus diet healing system and really digging deep into it, that was just like the missing link. That's the key. On a spiritual side, I mean, it was what I was looking for, because I was studying all kinds of different world religions and theosophy and Eastern religions, African religions, the mythology, and I just explored everything because I was looking for answers.
Right.
And it wasn't until I read the Mucus Diet Healing System book that it reframed all of those other books that I'd read. Like, all
I
the
have to read this book. I have to read
yeah. All the books here. I'll show it for everybody to. So this is the annotated, revised, and edited version that we put out. So it has the original text from the Mucus Diet, but then in the margins, I have notes on things that oftentimes is confusing to people, and just some of the language has been updated a little bit just so a modern reader can kind of understand it. But yeah, I've read that book. It recontextualize everything. I mean, whether if you're into the Bible, you can read the book kind of through that lens, or the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever it is you're into. This makes that book look different in a good way.
Wow.
It's
a little bit more. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I want you to talk.
Well, now, so an example would be that Eric brings up in the book a lot is the Genesis 1:29. Where the voice of God tells humans that you're fruit to eat all the fruit except one type of fruit, just from one tree, just to eat. You're a fruitarian. And at that point, death had not been brought upon humanity yet. And so it wasn't until humans broke the laws of eating that they then started to go through an aging process, started to even now, granted, it took thousands of years and you can follow that in the Bible, where it goes from people are living like 1,000 years and 900, 500. And there's always somebody that comes to say, well, they had a different time processing that. Well, and I'm saying, well, I agree, but I think it's in the other direction. I think like the 1,000 years are more like 100,000 years or something. And that this 120, we were supposed to be at the 120 year mark following the last great flood. And that's an interesting comparative analysis when you see that every historic culture and people around the world have a flood myth where their ancestors were affected by some great flood. And so that's just an interesting interesting thing to note. But when you start looking at that, like, okay, humans are, according to the Bible, like the last week, humans are supposed to get to 120 years old. That was considered at that time a very short period of time, where like, this is part of your punishment. But the way that I read that it's not some decree that was voiced down into humanity saying you will only die, live, you can not live longer than 120 years. It's literally just saying, okay, look, do what you want. Eat and drink whatever you want. You're already doing it. So eat and drink what you want. But here's the effect. The cause and effect. The effect is your life is going to be short. You're going to suffer pain, disease, and so it's a different way to read it. And you go back and you read through those sections, and you can, especially after you read the Mucus Diet book, and you can kind of see that and like, oh yeah, that does change it a little bit, where instead of just accepting this 120 year thing, you looking at it like, well, wait a minute, maybe the human body is supposed to last a lot longer than 120 years. But in order to do that, it would have to abide by the original rules that's in Genesis. That's like literally one of the first things that was told to humans. You're fruitarians, eat fruit, breathe and eat fruit. In Genesis 1:30, it says the animals are to eat the vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no animals eating animals yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so you start to see that, okay, there's, and however you take those stories, whether you look at it as mythology, if you believe in them as law, as whatever, it's still, it gives you the same story once you look at it from this other perspective. And it changes it up where you're like, oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So let's dive in a little bit into the mucus-free diet, because we talk about that a lot. I mean, I hear people say it, right? People talk about it, hear it, but I don't think that people understand what that means and how different foods, a lot of our foods do produce mucus within our bodies. So can you talk about a little bit more about some details about the mucus-free diet and what mucus does to the body? I know you have some images that you might I'm gonna let everybody know that's watching that if you are at a sensitive stomach, he will be showing some images of how our bodies respond to the things that we put into it. So just to give you guys that warning ahead of time. So
So the mucus diet healing system is a transitionary methodology, a transitionary system. The operative word here is system. So it's not a foods list diet. It's not, okay, well, what foods am I allowed to eat, not eat? It's more sophisticated than that, because you are transitioning away from wherever you're at now. So once you read the book and you kind of take, analyze, like, well, okay, what am I eating now? Where do I need to get? That puts into perspective what your transition is going to look like. So we all use the same principles of transition, but each person's transition is going to be unique to them.
Sure.
And different, because we're all dealing with different issues. We have different stomachs, we addicted and crave different foods. So essentially the components of the system include transition toward a mucus-free diet, or foods that don't turn into slime and pus residue in the body. So those foods are fruits and green leafy vegetables. But there are some mucus forming foods that are better to eat than others. Not all mucus forming foods are created equal. And so you learn about which ones are better to use for transitional purposes earlier on versus the ones that you would probably want to get off of sooner than later. So you're going to combine the dietary change, and you learn how to combine foods better to where they essentially aid the body in elimination. That's the key. That's our focus. We don't focus on nutrition concepts, and that's a whole other rabbit hole we get into, just the history and how horrible these nutrition theories are, especially for our health. But just in general, instead of focusing on that, we recommend focus on elimination. How well does this food go through my body, cleanse my blood, cleanse my colon? How well does this stuff, and does it leave behind slime or not? And so when you think about that, you can think of something like rice. Now, I know people love rice, but rice is something that turns into glue. You can make glue out of rice with water and rice in a stovetop. And so this kind of sticky, viscous kind of stuff is something that we want to avoid. So we want to find things that don't degrade down into slime. And now here's the picture. So we call this mucoid plaque.
Okay.
If you can
see
this.
See it.
Yeah. So this slime and stuff, people want to act like that this stuff isn't real. And it's like, oh, I can guarantee you that this is real. And I had a lot of this stuff come out of me. I get pictures of this from my clients where they wanted to share it with somebody. So they share it with me and like, look what came out in this the other day.
Well, that's real. People do. Yeah. I mean, my husband has even had that happen where he's gone on different transitional phases in his life for his health. And he's talked about some stuff that's come out and it's like, oh, wow.
And Yeah, and we do it without supplements, without me, because a lot of times people they'll do it and they'll get into a bunch of herbs and a bunch of different things, and you can explore some of that, but we're real advocates of learning to use food first. Like,
Okay.
how far can you take your healing using food and fasting, which is another one of the parts of the system, one of the spokes of the system, where you got food, you got fasting, then you have colon irrigation, or we like to promote lemon juice and distilled water enemas. And now you're talking about something that's really going to help loosen this stuff in the colon. And I know people sometimes are kind of like, oh man, enema, that's not natural. It's like, yeah, but this isn't natural,
Right.
you know, and
And
your
that's kind of
body
getting
needs
started. You're right. The enema is helping kind of get that loosening things up.
loosening exactly, loosen
Yeah.
stuff up and just bring that stuff out. We don't need to waste time messing around with trying. It's just like, let's get this stuff out of there. And when you start to put all of the pieces together of the system, then you start to see the change. I mean, you're going to see the changes. You're going to see, you're not craving the worst foods as much. You're not, a lot of ailments start to just go away. Things that you didn't even really notice was a problem. Sometimes those go away first, and you'll be like, oh wow, my back feels better. I didn't know it hurt. Just like that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's remarkable, because it's so, to us, it's so simple. Once you do it and you remove all this stuff, because a lot of people, if you've never really done this or checked out cleanses or detox or anything like that, you got 15 to 20 pounds of uneliminated fecal matter in your body, in your intestines, because that's a long way. 32 feet is pretty long, and as a tube. And if you imagine that entire tube is filled up with uneliminated fecal matter, and people think they're doing something when they have that one bowel movement a day, and they get if they're lucky, I guess, to have that, because I'm blown away every time somebody tells me that they go days without bowel movements. I'm like, hey, now you gotta, that's a problem. You need to address that problem. Like,
so let me ask you really quick. So I know you mentioned like rice is a given, right? We know rice and junk food and all that kind of good stuff, and potatoes are, but what are some, because I know you mentioned earlier some foods that are not as bad mucus. I mean, so when people are transitioning, because let's be honest, everybody can't go straight from 100 to 0, right? So what are some ways to like phase? What are some of those foods you mentioned earlier that can kind of help them go on that transitional journey?
So I'll just give some examples that I used. So early on, I used to make 100% wheat spaghetti, and so that's mucus forming, but it's not as mucus forming as like the white kind of that unbleached white flour spaghetti. And then I was combining sauteed and steamed vegetables with it, with a big raw salad. And beginning on, it was like that was moving through my system beautifully for a while. And then I started to have less and less of the pasta. And then I got to the point where I'm just having cooked vegetables with some tomato sauce and the big salad. And that's all I wanted. And
you had already given up meat. Meat was
well, so this helped me get off of meat. So so this was one of the things that helped me get off of meat. If I was kind of craving something heavy, and then I'd go and be like, okay, let me make this 100% wheat spaghetti, bunch of vegetables, and just hitting my body with these vegetables. And we call that mucus lean, something that's not as bad, but it's still mucus forming, but it's way better to use that than some other things. But just over a period of time, just hitting my body got used to that. It started like really liking it. I was cleaning up my taste buds so I could really appreciate the fruits and the vegetables that I was eating. Another thing, I'd made some things that was kind of like replicating a pizza taste. If I take like a wheat tortilla and put some sauce on it and a bunch of vegetables, like the chopped up, onions and that kind of stuff, and peppers, and then put that in the oven for however long for like 10 minutes and then praying. It was like, okay, that kind of took care of my little pizza craving that I was having.
Tricking the brain.
Yeah, you know, and that's part of the art of this process is you start to learn how to do that. You know, I used something that I don't use today back then was like beans. You know, I kind of used, it's like beans are starchy, they're mucus forming, but in the beginning they are way better to eat and can eliminate better because we evaluate if something's good or bad based on how well it eliminates. And the definition of how well it eliminates is how fast does it go through and how much slime residue is left behind. So if you get something doesn't leave behind too much slime residue and it moves through your system, then that's good. And you combine it, as oftentimes you take these mucus forming items and then you combine it the right way, it helps it eliminate. And so it allows you to get that fix, get that mucus fix that you're craving, but at the same time, you're eating in a way that's cleansing, that's still moving this stuff through. Then periodically, if you do a fast and you do a short term, we'll recommend like a 24-hour fast or a juice fast. I mean, we're not hardcore. We just like, hey, take it easy. Just be on fruit juices or even fruit and vegetable juices and see where you're at. To get an understanding of where you're at, and you do that for a day, and then that gives you insight into where you're at because your cravings, if you have some cravings, they might come up. Now, when you fast and you do lemon juice, distilled water enema at the same time, that's like hitting the reset button on your GI tract in your body because
what's the formula with that? Like, how much should a person? You know, because I don't want people just squirting up a bunch of lemon juice.
Yeah. So the easiest thing to do, if on my YouTube channel, I have like a how-to video.
Oh, okay.
And it also links to like a how-to with instructions on exactly how to do it. So I would refer folks to that to get the full, the full breakdown because it's very.
And before we leave, if you want to supply in the chat where people could go. That would be great. I was going to ask you at the end, but if you want to do that, that would be great to put that in there just where they can go check out your YouTube page. And I know that, I know you're busy and I don't want to like take up too much of your time, but I do want to touch on, once you do that, I do want to touch on your music part of you because, to me, I mean, I love music and I think that music heals. And I know that's one thing that you talk about is that how you use your music to heal. So I want to kind of touch on your journey with that and how that has also been a component to your, the path that you've been on in your journey. So,
I mean, that was really, really an important part of my journey because I got into this as an artist with aspirations of becoming a professional musician, hardcore artist. So, and I'm in college conservatory music, which means to just hang there most of your time you're studying and practicing. And that's basically, it's like kind of like a monastery where all I was doing was studying and practicing. And then on Friday nights and Saturday nights, before I started the diet, Friday nights and Saturday nights would be the only nights I would give myself to kind of go party and experience the college experience. Once I started practicing the diet, I was kind of left all that behind. And I really got into going out to being around live music as much as possible. And I would just go out and people would let me sit in, and I was just getting that experience of performing for people all the time and just trying to learn the music. And so for me, it went hand in hand with practicing the mucus diet because when I would practice my music, the vibrations of the music are sustaining, and when I surround myself with art or studying art and studying history and I just basically was immersing myself in all of these things that essentially people say, well, they're things that better you, but it was also what excited me and inspired me. And so when I did a couple pretty long fasts in those early years, and my music was a big part of that because without the music, without what we were doing, we had a band that was most of the members of the band were all practicing the mucus diet called Breatharian Ensemble. And then you can find there's old videos of the band that's out there, stuff we were doing as we were performing, and everybody on the stage was fasting.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah, I saw that you all had a band, but I didn't realize you all were practicing that together. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And so that was a real significant thing. I started playing music on the street, and I saw, Willie Smart, Brother Air. He kind of got me hip to that. He's like, if you really want to develop a sound and develop an edge, because we kind of talk a lot about that, where a lot of younger people in music today isn't edgy. There's not this edge, because it's kind of like, if you look at documentary footage from the 60s and the police brutality, police beating people up, and the protests and that kind of stuff, like it doesn't, a lot of the pop music of that time, or like Elvis, kind of, that doesn't really, especially for black folk, that don't match. But you put on some John Coltrane or some Ornette Coleman or something like that, some Archie Shepp, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that matches, the music is matching the vibration of the time. And we don't have that today. There's not a whole heck of a lot of artists, at least that I've come across, that really that embrace that element of the chaos of the time, and let it come through in their art and in their music. There's something that me and Brother Air was really concerned about and disappointed in, was over the past couple years, we saw musicians on stage with face masks and rock musicians that come out talking about, you can't come to this concert unless you've had a medical procedure, and we're like, wait a minute, this is the whole purpose of, rappers doing the same thing. It's like, wait a minute, what point did we get so soft that and so attached to just being obedient and going along with the mainstream, that all these people that formerly rock and roll was about rebellion at one point, or rap music, there are different eras of rap, but hip hop music and that kind of stuff, there's supposed to be a revolution at the foundation of it, some kind of revolutionary attitude, or that these folks are doing something that's going against the grain. But then I'm looking and I'm like, oh no, this is sad. This is sad. When where's the revolution? Where's that attitude? I'm not seeing that. And I did I had staged a protest, right? And I put all these pictures of all of the old, you're talking about, Billie Holiday, and just going all the way back to the the Strange Fruit, and Mingus, and the Fables of Faubus, and just there's a whole legacy of revolutionary music, black music, and I'm like,
especially in their time, and what could have been the consequences of sharing those type of lyrics.
And so I'm not seeing that energy today, not like that. And I'm there's people here and there, but that's why we're like, the movement that we want to bring to the forefront is physiological liberation. And that artists and musicians, this is the liberation struggle of our time. This is what, learn and control what you put in your body, and doing what's necessary to stay alive, to not go out like that, because they want to keep you addicted to the drugs. That's why they let a lot of the rappers and a lot of the public figures elevate things that keep people subdued,
lean, and it's in all the videos, and
it's like that stuff is okay. But then YouTube I had to take down like 25 of my videos because they didn't like my opinions on a couple things. Well, I'm not on here cussing. I'm pretty like, I bring documentation with me. I'm not, somewhat of an, got my academic background and things. That didn't matter. I said some words that censors didn't like, and there you go. You get a strike. So I've been like horribly censored, which is just something that I just hate. I just hate censorship on all level.
Yeah, which is happening a lot
yeah.
right now. So yeah, and let's be real, that's the truth, that a lot of people who share information about health, are being, taken down and censored. I mean, that's just a fact. It is happening.
Yep.
It's really unfortunate, very unfortunate. So
yep.
I want you to tell us a little bit about. We have a few more minutes. I want to make sure I'm saying this right. Musicology, is that how you say that?
Yeah, so ethnomusicology.
Ethno. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm terrible with words sometimes, but tell me a little bit more about that. I found that very interesting.
Yeah. So that's what my PhD is in, is ethnomusicology, or technically musicology with a specialization in ethnomusicology. Okay. And basically what that is a cultural study of music. So studying music as culture and culture as music. And so in some places they'll call it a musical anthropologist, or people that know what anthropology is. So these are people that will go into, in some cases, traditionally they would go into foreign cultures, or cultures of people that were non-Western or foreign to them. And then there were different methodologies to study the people. And historically there was problems just with that entire, because, Europeans would go into places and kind of just treat people like objects and subjects, as opposed to actually immersing themselves. And that's more of the newer methodology, is to immerse yourself into the culture. Where you learn the language, you learn how to plug in. Now, what I did, there was something kind of a newer phenomenon in the field. It's called ethnomusicology at home, where you are delving into your own music culture and breaking that down. And so I did it particularly on the culture of jazz education. And I did some field studies on a jazz called Jazz Camp. It was basically like a week-long thing where there's all these educators that come, and the kids pay some money. Well, it's people of all ages, actually. And you go, and just all day long you're studying music and playing in combos and this kind of stuff. And that was one of the places I went. I also went down to New Orleans and followed my friend Mario around and kind of immersed myself into that kind of environment. And I was particularly analyzing racial dynamics as it relates to academia and jazz, which I define as a black music. And I get into a whole definition of what black music is, which for me is signifies a continuum of musical styles of the African diaspora. So you could use the term black music. That doesn't mean everybody is black that plays it, but the foundation of it is based in the African diaspora. So instead of saying the music of the African diaspora all the time, and the folks on the streets, just was black music. And so that's more than just Black American music, because you got Central American black musical traditions and South American black musical traditions and the Caribbean and all of the continent of Africa. So that's wide ranging, as is European. So it's using the term where you could say European music, Chinese music, Indian classical music, or Middle Eastern. Those are sort of the big macro musical forms that people use the terms. And when you get into the African diaspora, there's a problem, because you'd say, well, okay, it's not African music, it's music of people that were from African descent. So there are elements that come from Africa that's in the music, but it's also a melting pot for other musical influences, but that are processed in a distinctively black cultural manner. And so that's the kind of stuff that I kind of get into. Whereas one of the things, particularly you see it in the 80s and the 90s, really get started, and now it's really, you know, they've kind of almost achieved what they wanted to achieve, which is the colorblind narrative. And in academia, that's in especially in things like jazz education, that has been the unwritten rule, as some say, the social unwritten social compact is you don't bring race up. If you're in the jazz environment, it's like when I went to school, there was only 4 Black people, including my trombone teacher professor. There was 4 of us in a program that had 40 people.
Oh, wow.
So out of 40 people, 4 are Black in a tradition that comes from Black culture. And the problems that I was having, that I get into in my dissertation, is how uncomfortable people are to talk about Black culture, how to talk about the history, to talk about the prospect of immersing oneself in to a Black cultural space. I mean, where jazz is involved, or where music is involved, and to make that a priority to do that. Because when you're studying other musical traditions, if you're studying Indian classical music and you're going to get a degree in that, then in some cases they would expect you to, on maybe, you know, in higher level degrees and higher level programs, they would expect you to go over to India, sit at the foot of a guru. And I knew a guy that well, I actually know a couple guys that basically immersed themselves so deep into Indian culture. Their wives are Indian. They had spent long periods of time in India. They just love the culture. They immerse themselves, and they were accepted in.
Yeah, it's the best way to learn, to be in the spirit of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
You know, and so when you get into Black music, that becomes a taboo subject to suggest that, you know, little white guy that grew up in the suburbs, that now he wants to learn how to play this music, that he has to leave the school, the comfort and the protection of the school environment, and go hit the streets, or go to some, like, because when I was coming up, still had some of them old Black bars. So I was like 17 years old, you know, getting in, like literally I'm walking in, and on the door it says, you know, you must be 25 to get in. But I got an instrument, and at that, you know, and I looked older at that time anyway, but when I get in there, and I got a chance to absorb that entire environment of just you know, just that you got to be there, you know. I'm talking about if you've been there. But that's something that ends up touching your music. There's a vibe that through the osmosis, and that's what starts to get kind of controversial in academic circles, is because they want to avoid any kind of what would be called like essentialism, that would, you know, that would basically kind of lean to like, well, you're born with it, or people that are from a certain culture, certain race, are inherently born with certain attributes. And so it's like, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the vibe of the environment and the way that artists inherently process their environment. And so you put yourself in a certain environment and let your art flow, it's going to influence it. And, you know, and so those are the kinds of influences that I don't always see with the younger people, you know, going hanging out. Because I had Black mentors that was telling me that you need to go check out some blues. So I go to like the Black Blues Club. You need to get some funk in your what you're doing. So go hang out with the funk guys. You know, man, you need to get some R&B chops happening. Go hang out at the R&B guys. And as I'm doing that, I'm noticing there's a relationship with all of this music. Because there's blues is a foundation of funk, blues is a foundation in jazz, but then each tradition, or then somebody else say, man, you need to get yourself to to a black church and go play with them, play some gospel. And so these are different and distinctive musical styles, but there are elements, distinguishing characteristics that we would call, that we could point to as being part of black musical tradition that put them all together, that there's a thread through all of these different styles. And I thought that was fascinating because I noticed that the jazz musician in the realm of black music was kind of like a Jedi figure. Like that was the figure that could, of all of those different musicians, they were the ones that were not only expected, but could go into any one of those different spaces and sound like they're from there.
Right. Yeah.
So like the jazz musician that's really done the work they're supposed to do, they can go play at a black church, and everybody there should think that's what they do. Like this is like a cat from the church, or same thing with going to the funk clubs and the R&B and all that kind of stuff. And that's a part of the black musical tradition that I don't see adequately represented and taught within academia, and that's what my whole dissertation's about. That that's which you can find. It's on I could send a link out to that. Oh, I forgot I was going to look up my links, but
I can add them out too. I can put them in, so don't worry about it, because I have all of those in my archive, so I will get that and put that on there as well for you. But no, I really love that you shared that, because like I said, I'm a music person, and I do believe that music does heal the soul. And it's interesting because a few months ago I went to Cleveland and interviewed someone there at Riddle Green Partnership, and they have an urban farm outside, and he was talking about that. David Hester's his name, Dr. Greenhand they call him. He was talking about how even within his greenhouses, he doesn't play like hardcore rap, he doesn't play certain music, he plays certain music in his greenhouses to grow the plants and to like really have that connection with the plants and to feed them right with the musical spirit, for lack of a better word. And it was really cool how he talks about that. It's kind of like what you just talked about, how music does transcend a lot of things and really does connect us in different levels and actually heals us internally more than we know. And I really like too how you touched on going to these different spaces to really connect with them and to learn about them. I mean, we have to do that in so many different parts of our life, not just with music, but just period, right? Sometimes you can read a book and that's great, and you can study something that's great, but until you actually go and actually see it in real life, how a culture really practices or how someone really goes about day-to-day life, you really can't understand them in its totality. So I really appreciate that. I had one more question, but I know that time has ran out, but I could talk about this all day because it's really
cool. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate it because I don't always get asked like good musical questions, to really get deep into that, because for whatever reason, that's something that it's lacking just in general in the school systems, and culturally it's not being passed down the way it used to be in black families. And those musical traditions was something that even the younger people would be into whatever their era's music was, but they always had that history was still there. Like they still knew that history, and it was like, and something me and my brother Eric talk about it, because it's like something happened in the 80s and the 90s where there was like this disconnect where there was a lot of history that got lost. And for some, just for whatever reason, and we've argued about different reasons of why that happened. But
no, it's true. I was just talking to somebody the other day about how we culturally pass down stories, orally, right? And that is being lost too. And I know some people are really trying to keep that alive, where they're passing on these stories and keeping that communication open. But I really appreciate this because it's just so much truth to this. But yeah, when I saw the part of, you know, your music and stuff, I was really intrigued. Not to mention the fact that you were in Cincinnati, where I'm from, so I was really impressed with that. I was like, okay, Cincinnati show up. But you know, just that component of health and music is such a beautiful connection to me, because we really do need that. We need both things, of course, but they do feed each other. So I will ask you before we leave, just in closing, if you have some words of encouragement to leave with us, what would they be? Just to really, you know, people hear this stuff sometimes and, you know, goes in one ear, out the other. They feel kind of inspired in that moment and then they fall off. And I know at the end of the day, it's really up to people to pave their own way into their health and stuff. But just some words that you would leave with us, you know, before we end this live. So
just that, you know, health is wealth, and we have to be open to think and live outside of the so-called box. Understand that box was put there to subdue us, to keep us as, you know, polite subjects, to subject us, and it's done sometimes in ways that are crafty to make us feel like we have more freedom than we do. It's where it's like, okay, yeah, you can go buck wild over here. We'll have the police around and everything, you know, but you can do whatever you want for a short period of time over here. Then, you know, as long as you're going to work over here, you're doing this or that kind of stuff. And so I just encourage everybody to check out the Mucus Diet Healing System. That's the that's the one, Mucus Diet Healing System by Professor Arnold Ehret. This is the annotated, revised, and edited edition. And to read it with an open mind, and you don't have to agree with everything. It's okay. There's some things that I didn't really understand until I practiced it for a year. And then I went back to the book and I'm like, oh, now I see what he was talking about. But just having the open mind, understanding that that everything can be questioned. You know, we can question all of these. A lot of my content is you know, questioning things like the protein theory and the vitamin theory, and just looking at the history of, well, where did these theories even come from? Why are we just assuming that they are correct without stopping and questioning and saying, well, hold on a second, like, why? Because there are many paradoxes in all of those kind of nutritional theories, where it's like, okay, you need to eat this, but on the other hand, it could be the thing that's causing cancer and heart disease. And it's like, I'm like, wait a minute. You're not supposed to have a paradox like that, you know, not on something as important as eating and what you put into your body. And so the Mucus Diet Healing System essentially solves that problem. we solve that problem and remove those paradoxes, because we're being conditioned to eat in a way that is just 100% unnatural. And so I just say, everybody, you know, you definitely can do this.
It's never too late.
Never too late. You know, as long as there's breath in the body, it's never too late to try to clean yourself up, get yourself together, and then let that be your legacy. Pass that down. Clean blood. Passing down clean blood. That's the best gift that you could give anybody in your life, anybody in your family, but especially offspring or your children, you know, to raise them in this way, because and you start to see how these dependencies and addictions that we were talking about earlier are, you know, they start with the parents. And because the kid doesn't demand, a child doesn't know what a Snickers bar tastes like until an adult gives them a Snickers bar.
No,
they don't demand it, you know, but it's this whole, again, this tradition of, well, I ate this, I want to make sure they have a good childhood and they're not weird, and there's a social thing and this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, we got to get beyond all of that, because we got to start. I always say it's like starting over again, because this hasn't worked.
It's rebirth.
A real renaissance, a real rebirth. And so So I encourage everybody to dig deep and, to make that happen. You can definitely transform. I mean, together we can transform this planet in a good way and get humanity back on track to where we're looking at, like 120. The first 120 years is like adolescence, and we, really get things back in order.
Yeah,
And,
and it takes one person at a time, right? It takes one person at a time.
Yeah.
No, it really does. I really appreciate that. I really like how you touched on earlier too about the supplement part, because I know a lot of people jump right into that because they feel like, oh, I need all these supplements. But I really like how you touched on that part and the social part. That is so true. I mean, how people are afraid to do things sometimes just because socially they don't want to be awkward or they don't want to lose friends or miss out on opportunities. But it is about what's important. And when you said, health is wealth, we spend so much money, with medicines and, pills and in hospitals and doctor's visits. And so sometimes that health is the saving of wealth, right? It's like saving the money. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a whole, that's like a whole other thing where you start getting into how much money you save on this path, because people want to complain about, oh man, it's expensive. And it's like, well, not if you know what you're doing. It's not, but the money that you save in doctor's bills, and I mean, man, my aunt, we had got a bill for $30,000. Just like because you think that there's again, that's more of that trusting massa. Like, oh, my insurance is going to take care of me when and the chips are down. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, you don't qualify for that payment, so you owe us $30,000.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. And again, it's the kind of thing that people aren't ready for.
I'm sorry, I keep ending it, but then I keep starting up because it's so exciting. We have to do a part 2 at some point in time. I would love to talk to you again. This is really great. I really love the information. I'm definitely going to get the book and read it. I know my husband would love to read it because he's really intrigued with all of that as well. And thank you for helping me with the correction of my spelling. I transfigure letters sometimes, so I appreciate that. So no, I just appreciate your time. I appreciate what's her name? Kyrene? Is that how you pronounce it?
Kyrene,
Kyrene. Yes, I appreciate her for helping set this up. So thank you to her. And thank you for your time. And I wish you well. And hopefully one day all of our paths will cross. And, because we're always in Ohio. So, me and my husband, when we travel through, maybe, we can visit you both and, really sit down and break bread together. Not real bread, but not real bread, but, and have some more conversations.
Where are you at?
I'm in Michigan. But I'm from Cincinnati. So I'm always in Ohio or some part of Ohio, and that's nothing but down the road. So I wish you well, and I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, you too. Bye.